The number was $62,500. I found it on a Tuesday afternoon in September, sitting at my home office desk, going through the joint bank statements as I did at the end of every month, a habit from the early years of our marriage, when the money was tighter and the tracking mattered, that I'd kept long after it stopped being strictly necessary because I am a person who likes to know where things stand. Owen used to tease me about it. He called it my accountant brain, which was not quite accurate. I'm a project manager, not an accountant, but the observation was fair. I like the numbers to make sense. I like the shape of things to be visible. The number was $62,500, transferred out of our joint account on a date in March, 6 months earlier. The payee was listed as a business account I didn't immediately recognize. A business name that meant nothing to me. I looked at it for a long time. Then I looked at what was transferred in, the same week in March, to cover it. The incoming transfer was from an account I did recognize. I had seen that account number on enough shared expenses over the years, dinners, gifts, a family vacation we'd all taken together 2 summers ago, that I knew it without needing to look it up. My sister's account. Natalie. I want to be precise about what I felt in the next few minutes, because precision matters here and because the easy version of this story is to say that I knew immediately what I was looking at. I did not know immediately. What I felt first was confusion, the genuine, dumb confusion of a mind that has not yet understood something and is trying to build the bridge between a data point and a conclusion it doesn't want to reach. There was an explanation that was not the explanation. There had to be. Natalie had transferred $62,500 to our joint account. Owen had immediately transferred the same amount to a business account I didn't recognize. These 2 facts, taken together, meant something. I was willing to consider every possible meaning before I settled on the obvious one. I opened a new browser tab and searched for the business name. It was Owens. A consulting company, registered 6 months before the transfer, the registration date 3 weeks after Owen and I had had a conversation, a bad one of the worst of our marriage, about the money troubles he'd been having with his previous business, the one that had failed quietly and expensively the year before. He had not told me he'd registered a new one. He had not mentioned a $62,500 transfer into our joint account that had then been moved out to fund it. I sat at my desk for a long time. Then I opened the previous month's statements. And the one before that. My name is Vera. I'm 36 years old. I have been married to Owen for 7 years. I have a sister named Natalie who is 2 years older, who has been married to a man named David for 11 years, who has 2 daughters, who lives 40 minutes away, who calls me on Sunday evenings without fail and whose calls I have answered without fail for as long as I can remember, because that is the texture of what it has meant to be her sister. We are close, Natalie and I, we're close. I am still working out which tense is correct, which is one of the specific challenges of losing someone who is still alive. I should tell you about Natalie before I tell you what I found when I went further back through the statements, because Natalie is not a character in this story, she is a person, and persons deserve to be described before they are exposed. She is, by the measurement most people use, the more successful of the 2 of us. Better job, higher status marriage, bigger house, a life that has always been organized around visible achievement in ways that mine has not been. She is also genuinely funny, privately kind, the person I called when my mother was sick 3 years ago and the only one who knew what to say. I have spent my whole life being proud of her in the specific way that younger siblings are proud of older ones who seem to have figured out the things you're still working on. I have spent the last several months understanding that the life she presented had large and carefully managed gaps in it. The statements told the story over 4 months. Not $62,500 all at once, that was the largest single transfer, but it was preceded and followed by smaller ones. 11 transactions in total, spanning 17 months, beginning 14 months ago and ending abruptly 3 weeks before I found them, as though a tap had been turned off. Total transferred from Natalie's account to ours, then out to Owen's business, $62,500 in the large transfer, plus an additional $24,800 across the 10 smaller ones. Total, $87,300. I did not say the number out loud. I wrote it at the top of a piece of paper in the specific way I write things I need to think about, boxed, underlined, given room. Then I sat and I looked at it and I understood that the project I was now engaged in was not the comfortable monthly accounting I had sat down to do an hour ago. It was something else entirely. The 11 transactions had all followed the same pattern: transfer from Natalie's account to joint, transfer from joint to Owen's business account within 48 hours, always. Not once had the money sat in our joint account for longer than 2 days. Not once had Owen mentioned it. This was not careless. Careless things sit in accounts. This was deliberate. I opened a fresh document. I began to list what I knew and what I needed to confirm. What I knew: the transfers existed. The timing was consistent. The business account was Owen's, unilaterally opened and funded without my knowledge. The source of the funding was my sister. What I needed to confirm: whether there was any explanation I hadn't considered. Whether there was a reason Natalie would be funding my husband's business that did not involve a relationship I was not supposed to know about. I spent 3 days looking for that explanation. I did not find one. What I found instead, over those 3 days, was the shape of the thing. The specific contour of a situation that had been happening inside my marriage and my closest family relationships simultaneously, invisibly, for 17 months. I found a series of calendar entries in Owen's shared calendar, the one we'd set up years ago, a habit from the early pandemic when we were both working from home and needed to coordinate, that described meetings with a consulting client named N. The entries appeared 18 months ago and ran forward with the consistency of a recurring appointment. Twice a week. Always during hours I would have been at my office. I found, in the pocket of a jacket Owen had left on the bedroom chair, not snooping, just moving it so I could get into the wardrobe, a receipt from a restaurant I have never been to, dated 4 months ago, for 2 people. I found a text message, on Owen's phone, which he had left unlocked on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. Again, not snooping, I saw the screen light up in the preview before I understood I was seeing something I was not supposed to see. The preview was enough. I did not read further. I did not need to. The preview said, "She's going to find out eventually. We need to talk about what we do when she does." Owen's phone. My sister's name above the text. I put the phone back on the counter exactly where I'd found it. I went into the bathroom and I stood at the sink and I ran the cold water for a long time. I need to be careful here, telling this part, because this is the part where the story could become about the romantic betrayal, and I don't want it to be only that, because the money is the part that tells me something the texts alone do not. People do terrible things to the people they love and the reasons are complicated, and I have spent enough time with my own complicated feelings about Owen to know that the how and the why of what happened between him and my sister are not mine to fully understand or explain. The money is a different kind of information. The money says, this was not an accident. The money says, someone made a decision to invest. The money says, when Owen's business failed and he needed funding and came to me desperate and frightened and I held him while he cried about it, during the worst conversation in our marriage, the one where everything felt like it was breaking, he had already, by that point, begun to find another solution. Through my sister. With my sister. He had been held by both of us at once. That is what the money says. I did not confront Owen immediately. I want to explain this choice because I think it's the part of the story people find most difficult to understand, and because the explanation matters for what comes later. When you are in possession of evidence of a betrayal this large, this documented, this deliberate, this financial, the instinct is to act immediately, to confront, to lay it all out while the anger is still at its peak and the words are ready. I didn't do that. I waited 5 days. I spent those 5 days doing 2 things. The first was making sure the evidence was organized, not in the obsessive, spiraling way of someone who can't stop touching a wound, but in the practical way of a project manager who knows that a confrontation without organized evidence is just an accusation, and accusations can be managed and reframed and deflected. Evidence organized clearly and presented calmly cannot be managed. It can only be confirmed or denied. I made a folder. Not a physical one, a digital one, backed up in 3 places, containing screenshots of the bank statements, the calendar entries, a photograph of the receipt, and a written account, dated and timestamped, of what I had seen on Owen's phone screen. I wrote that account within 10 minutes of seeing it, while the words were still exact in my memory. The second thing I did in those 5 days was grieve. Not visibly. Owen was home, and I was maintaining the surface, which required the kind of performance I had not previously known I was capable of. Dinner was cooked. Conversations were had. I listened to him tell me about his day, the consulting business I now knew the full history of, the client he was hoping to close. I listened. I did not say anything I did not mean to say. At night, after he was asleep, I went to the living room and I sat in the dark and I let myself feel what I was feeling, which was not one thing but several simultaneously, grief and rage and a specific, nauseating disorientation that comes from discovering that two people you trusted have been constructing a parallel reality inside your own, and that the parallel reality is as detailed and long-running as a real life. 17 months. The same length as my last major project at work. Long enough to develop habits and rhythms and a shared vocabulary. Long enough to stop being an event and become a circumstance. People do terrible things to the people they love and the reasons are complicated, and I have spent enough time with my own complicated feelings about Owen to know that the how and the why of what happened between him and my sister are not mine to fully understand or explain. The money is a different kind of information. The money says, this was not an accident. The money says, someone made a decision to invest. The money says, when Owen's business failed and he needed funding and came to me desperate and frightened and I held him while he cried about it, during the worst conversation in our marriage, the one where everything felt like it was breaking, he had already, by that point, begun to find another solution. Through my sister. With my sister. He had been held by both of us at once. That is what the money says. I did not confront Owen immediately. I want to explain this choice because I think it's the part of the story people find most difficult to understand, and because the explanation matters for what comes later. When you are in possession of evidence of a betrayal this large, this documented, this deliberate, this financial, the instinct is to act immediately, to confront, to lay it all out while the anger is still at its peak and the words are ready. I didn't do that. I waited 5 days. I spent those 5 days doing two things. The first was making sure the evidence was organized, not in the obsessive, spiraling way of someone who can't stop touching a wound, but in the practical way of a project manager who knows that a confrontation without organized evidence is just an accusation, and accusations can be managed and reframed and deflected. Evidence organized clearly and presented calmly cannot be managed. It can only be confirmed or denied. I made a folder. Not a physical one, a digital one, backed up in 3 places, containing screenshots of the bank statements, the calendar entries, a photograph of the receipt, and a written account, dated and timestamped, of what I had seen on Owen's phone screen. I wrote that account within 10 minutes of seeing it, while the words were still exact in my memory. The second thing I did in those 5 days was grieve. Not visibly. Owen was home, and I was maintaining the surface, which required the kind of performance I had not previously known I was capable of. Dinner was cooked. Conversations were had. I listened to him tell me about his day, the consulting business I now knew the full history of, the client he was hoping to close. I listened. I did not say anything I did not mean to say. At night, after he was asleep, I went to the living room and I sat in the dark and I let myself feel what I was feeling, which was not one thing but several simultaneously, grief and rage and a specific, nauseating disorientation that comes from discovering that two people you trusted have been constructing a parallel reality inside your own, and that the parallel reality is as detailed and long-running as a real life. 17 months. The same length as my last major project at work. Long enough to develop habits and rhythms and a shared vocabulary. Long enough to stop being an event and become a circumstance. I also thought about David. David is 42, an architect, a man I have known for 11 years, who once helped me move a sofa up 3 flights of stairs and then bought me a beer afterward and made me laugh harder than I had laughed in weeks. A man who has been raising 2 daughters with my sister and who has, as far as I was able to tell from the outside of their marriage, been doing it with genuine commitment. Who had, as far as I could tell, no idea. I thought about whether to tell him. Not as a strategic question, whether it would hurt Natalie, whether it would improve my position, whether there was something to gain. Those calculations were not in me. I thought about it as a moral question, the kind that doesn't resolve cleanly. David had a right to know what was happening in his marriage, and the information that would tell him was information I possessed. If the positions were reversed, if David knew something about Owen, something that changed the picture of my life completely, I would want him to tell me. I would want someone to tell me. On the 5th day, I told Owen I needed to talk to him. We sat at the kitchen table. His choice, he'd sat down when I said I needed to talk, choosing the kitchen table the way people choose the kitchen table for conversations that feel official, as though the ordinariness of the setting provides some kind of buffer. I let him choose. I sat across from him. I put the folder on the table. I've spent the last 5 days going through the joint account statements, I said. And then going further. I want to give you the chance to tell me what I found before I tell you what I found. He looked at the folder. His face did something I have replayed many times, trying to parse it, not surprise exactly, more a kind of arriving, the expression of a man who has known a conversation was coming for a long time and has finally entered it. Vera, he said. Tell me about the business account, I said. The silence was long. Long enough that I understood he was not going to take the offer to explain first. He was going to make me say it, which meant the account was not going to have an innocent explanation, because innocent explanations don't require that strategy. It's a consulting company, he said. I've been building it for about 18 months. I was going to tell you when it was more established. I didn't want to worry you with another business after. Where did the startup funding come from? I said. A beat. I had some savings I hadn't mentioned, he said. Owen, I said. I have the bank statements. All of them. I have the incoming transfers. I have the dates. I know which account they came from. He looked at the table. Tell me, I said. Tell me what it is. I want to hear you say it, he told me. Not everything. I think there are things he couldn't make himself say out loud in that kitchen, in that marriage, to my face, but enough. The business arrangement had started as what he described as a loan, Natalie offering to fund the startup costs in exchange for a percentage of future revenue. He said it had started that way and he had told himself, for a while, that was all it was. I asked him when it became something else. He said about a year ago. I sat with that. A year ago was 8 months into the arrangement. A year ago Owen and I had been on a vacation to Portugal, a good one of our best, and I had thought we were building something back after the difficult year with his failed business. I had thought the vacation was the beginning of a recovery. I understood now that the vacation had been a coincidence, and the recovery had been, at least partly, funded by my sister. Does she know you're telling me this? I said. I haven't talked to her since. He stopped. Since you saw the preview on your phone, I said. He looked up. I saw the screen, I said. I saw the text. I didn't read further. I didn't need to. Something in his face shifted, the specific shift of a person who has been holding a story together and has just understood the story no longer holds. She said we needed to talk about what to do when you found out, I said. How long have you been having that conversation? He didn't answer. I picked up the folder. I'm going to need you to move out, I said. I'd like you to do it this week. I'm going to speak to a lawyer before the end of the month. The business, the money it was funded with, will be part of what we discuss with the lawyers. He started to say something. I'm not asking you to respond right now, I said. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You can respond when you've had time to understand it. I stood up. I picked up the folder. I went to my office and I closed the door. I called Natalie the next morning. I want to be precise about why I called her rather than going to see her, because it's a small decision that I thought about carefully. I called rather than visiting because visiting would have required me to be in the same physical space as her, and I did not know, at that point, whether I could be in the same physical space as my sister without losing the careful control I had maintained for 6 days. The phone gave me a few inches of distance. Enough. She answered on the second ring, with the warmth she always uses when she sees my name, the particular brightness, the intimacy of it. I had been the person that brightness was for, my whole life. Vera, she said. I was just thinking about you. I know about the money, I said. Silence. And about the rest of it, I said. I'm not going to go through the details. I have the statements. Owen told me. I know the shape of it. More silence. Longer. I'm not calling to have a conversation right now, I said. I don't think I can. I'm calling to tell you that I know, and that I think you should know that David doesn't know yet. Her voice, when it came, was changed. Lower. Something stripped out of it. Vera. I haven't decided what to do about that yet, I said. I wanted you to know that I was deciding. I ended the call. I spent 2 days making the decision about David. 2 days in which Owen moved most of his things to his brother's apartment with a quietness that I understood as the quietness of someone who has given up the argument he would otherwise have had. 2 days in which Natalie called me 3 times and I did not answer. 2 days in which I went to work, managed my projects, ate meals I mostly didn't taste, and came home to a house that was producing, already, the hollow quality of a space preparing to be lived in differently. Here is how I arrived at the decision. I thought about what I would want. I have returned to this question throughout this whole story because it is the one that cuts through everything else: the strategy, the anger, the grief, the complicated calculus of how information lands and what it costs. What would I want, if the positions were reversed? What would I want someone to do with the truth, if they had it? I would want the truth. I have always wanted the truth, even when the truth was not the thing I was hoping for, because I have found, consistently, that living inside a lie someone else knows about is worse than living inside a painful reality. The lie is the cage. The reality, however hard, is open air. David had a right to open air. I also thought about his daughters. 2 girls, 8 and 10, who had nothing to do with any of this, whose lives were going to be changed by whatever happened next regardless of what I did. I could not protect them from that change. But I could make sure their father was not the last person to know what his family actually was. On the second day, I texted David. Not the content, just, can you talk? I need to tell you something. It's important. He called back within 20 minutes, voice careful in the way of someone who has already sensed, from the texture of the message, that careful is the right register. I told him, I am not going to render the full conversation I had with David, because it was his to have, and the grief in it was his, and I do not own his grief. What I will tell you is the shape of it. I told him what I knew, in the order I had learned it, without editorializing. I told him about the money because the money was documented and documentation is harder to dismiss than feeling. I told him about the calendar entries, the receipt, the text preview. I told him everything I had put in the folder, in the same flat, careful voice I had used with Owen. He asked me 2 questions while I was talking. The first was how long. I told him the minimum I could confirm from the documentation, which was 17 months, and I said that the documentation only went back as far as I had been able to access, and that the actual span might be different. The second was whether I was sure. I said yes. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Thank you for telling me, he said. His voice had the quality of something that has been compressed under enormous weight and is still, somehow, holding its structure. I know that wasn't easy. I thought you had a right to know, I said. I did, he said. I do. A pause. I'm sorry, Vera. I'm sorry this happened to you. I was not expecting that. I had not been thinking about myself in the context of this call. I had been thinking about him. Thank you, I said. And then, because it was true, I'm sorry too. The 48 hours that followed that call were the most suspended of my life. I use the word suspended deliberately. Not frantic, not dramatic in the way of things that are happening all at once, suspended, the way a thing hangs in the air between being thrown and landing. I knew something had been set in motion. I did not know how it would land. Owen was gone, his remaining things collected on the second day. Natalie was calling, not getting through, and then, on the afternoon of the second day, stopping. The silence after the stopped calls was its own kind of sound. I went about my life in the way that you go about your life when your life has just changed its fundamental shape, but the change hasn't fully arrived yet, mechanically, competently, with the background hum of something unresolved running under everything. I finished a project deliverable at work. I answered emails. I made the kind of dinner I make when I am feeding myself and not anyone else, which is simpler and quieter and does not require planning. On the evening of the second day, David called me back. He said, "I've asked Natalie to leave." I did not say anything for a moment. "The girls are with me," he said. "She's at her mother's." "David," I said. "I needed you to know," he said. "You made a hard choice when you called me. You didn't have to do that. I wanted you to know the outcome." "That wasn't why I told you," I said. "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted you to know." We talked for a few more minutes. Not about the situation, about the girls, about what the next few days looked like for him practically, about nothing in particular. The conversation of two people who have just been through something that leveled something and are standing in the rubble trying to remember what ordinary sounds like. Before he hung up, he said, "Are you okay?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that since the Tuesday I found the bank statement. "I don't know yet," I said. "That's honest," he said. "It's the best I can do right now," I said. "It's enough," he said. "I want to tell you what the weeks after were actually like, because I think the story demands honesty about the aftermath rather than a clean narrative of recovery, and I am constitutionally unable to give you a clean narrative I don't believe. The weeks after were hard. The word hard is inadequate, but all the bigger words feel like performances, and I am done with performances. The weeks after were hard in the way that hard things are hard when they arrive not as a single loss but as two simultaneous losses, each one complete on its own, together producing a weight that doesn't seem like it should be survivable and then turns out to be survivable, just barely, just enough. Owen I had been losing for some time without knowing it, which is a different kind of loss than sudden loss. When you go back over the preceding year with what you now know, you can see the places where the distance was already in him, where he was already somewhere else, and the marriage you thought you were having turns out to have been, at least in part, a solo project. That retrospective quality makes it strange to grieve. You are grieving something you partially already lost, and partially never had. Natalie is harder. I have thought about this extensively and I keep arriving at the same conclusion. The grief for Owen is the grief of a marriage ending, which is terrible and real and survivable. The grief for Natalie is the grief of a selfhood ending, because my sister is part of who I am in a way my husband, even after 7 years, is not. The Sunday phone calls. The shorthand we have for everything. The person who knew me before I knew myself and who I have been in conversation with my whole life. She chose to step out of that and into something else. And the something else was my marriage. There is no framing in which that makes sense to me. I have tried several. None of them hold. Natalie called, eventually, when it was clear I would not answer indefinitely. She called from a number I didn't recognize, her mother's landline, which I knew because it had the area code of our hometown and I used to call it from memory when I was young, and the number is in there somewhere with all the other things you learn before you learn you've learned them. I answered because I thought it was going to be my mother. It was Natalie. She said, "I need you to understand." "I don't think you should use this call to explain yourself to me," I said. "I think you should use it to ask me how I am." Silence. "How are you?" she said. Flat. Not a question, not yet, just the words. "Terrible," I said. "And you?" More silence. "I didn't mean for it to," she started. Stopped. "I didn't think it would go this far." "It went this far because you funded my husband's secret business for 17 months, I said. "It went this far because you built a second life inside my life and David's life, and when it collapsed it took 4 of us with it. It isn't a question of how far you meant it to go. It went as far as it went." She didn't say anything for a long time. "What do you want from me?" she said finally. Small. The smallness of someone who has run out of positions. I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it, because I did not want to answer that question with something I hadn't considered, and because the answer is not as simple as the question implies. "I want you to be honest with David," I said. Not because I'm asking you to, but because it's the right thing to do and he deserves it. I want you to be honest with your daughters when they're old enough to understand it, not in a way that damages them but in a way that doesn't require them to live inside a lie. And I want you to leave me alone while I figure out who I am now that I'm not someone's wife and not someone's sister in the way I was. Not your sister, she said. The words sounded like something breaking. Not the way we were, I said. I don't know what comes after that. I'm not closing the door forever because I don't know what forever looks like from here. But right now I need space. A lot of it. For a long time. She said okay. She was crying. I felt the tears the way you feel the tears of someone you love deeply, as a physical thing, as something that costs you something even when you're the one who had the right to cause them. I love you, she said. I know, I said. I love you too. That's what makes this so hard. I ended the call. The lawyer I found is named Patricia Wells, and she is 60 years old and very good and completely unsentimental about other people's money, which is the precise quality I needed in a divorce lawyer. We have had 4 meetings. The business Owen funded with my sister's money is part of the marital asset conversation. Patricia is interested in it in the specific way that family lawyers become interested in financial irregularities, which is to say entirely and with focus. I am not going to tell you the legal outcome because it is still in progress and also because this story is not fundamentally about the money, even though the money is how I found it. The money is the document. The document is not the thing it documents. I have also seen a therapist, starting 3 weeks after the Tuesday in September when I found the bank statement. Her name is Dr. Imani Ross and she has helped me understand several things I was having trouble holding on my own, including the specific grief of the double loss, which she named for me in a session in the second month as compound bereavement, the particular damage that happens when 2 relationships that hold up your sense of yourself collapse simultaneously. She said it is not uncommon in situations like mine, that the intensity of it doesn't indicate weakness, and that the path through it is not the path around it. I have been taking the path through it. Some days it is fine and some days it is not fine, and I have stopped trying to make those 2 things consistent with each other, because they are both true on different days and the project of forcing them into a single emotional state was exhausting me. It has been 7 months since the Tuesday in September, when I found the bank statement. Her name is Dr. Imani Ross and she has helped me understand several things I was having trouble holding on my own, including the specific grief of the double loss, which she named for me in a session in the second month as compound bereavement, the particular damage that happens when 2 relationships that hold up your sense of yourself collapse simultaneously. She said it is not uncommon in situations like mine, that the intensity of it doesn't indicate weakness, and that the path through it is not the path around it. I have been taking the path through it. Some days it is fine and some days it is not fine, and I have stopped trying to make those 2 things consistent with each other, because they are both true on different days and the project of forcing them into a single emotional state was exhausting me. It has been 7 months since the Tuesday in September. I live alone in the house that was ours, which will be sold when the legal process concludes and which I have been making mine, incrementally, in the small ways that you make a space yours when the person who shared it has left, a different arrangement of furniture, a new plant in the kitchen window, cooking the things I like that Owen didn't, keeping the hours I want without negotiating them with anyone. Owen and I communicate through the lawyers now, mostly, which is its own kind of relationship, precise, bounded, with formal rules. We spoke directly twice in the early weeks and each time produced more pain than progress. I do not blame him for this. I think some conversations need a buffer, and the lawyers are the buffer. There will come a time when the legal process is complete and the buffer is no longer structurally required, and I expect that by then we will both be far enough from the original wound to speak without it reopening everything. I hope that's true. I intend for it to be true. David I have spoken to twice, both times briefly, both times in the context of logistics that were genuinely logistical. He needed to know the name of my lawyer for a document. I needed to confirm a detail for my account of the timeline. Both times were correct and careful and held a warmth that I did not expect and was grateful for. He is doing, by his own brief account, the way you do when your life has been reorganized by something enormous, functioning, adjusting, putting one day in front of the other with the specific determination of a man who has daughters who need him to keep going. His daughters are okay, as far as I can tell from the outside. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, and they have a father who is showing up. I think about what he said, "Are you okay?" I think about it because in the middle of the worst week of his life, with his own marriage falling apart and everything he thought he knew about the last 17 months being rewritten, he asked me that question. I did not know, at the time. I said so. I am closer to knowing now. I have not spoken to Natalie since the phone call. 7 months. The longest we have gone without speaking since she left for university when I was 16 and we were both figuring out what distance meant between us. I don't know what happens next. I have stopped trying to know. There is a version of the future in which we find our way back to something different, smaller, more honest, not the mythology we were maintaining but something truer. I cannot see that future clearly from here. It may exist. It may not. I am not closing the door because closing it permanently would require a certainty I don't have, and I have learned, in the last 7 months, that certainty is a thing I should be careful about claiming. What I know is this: I told the truth when it cost me everything. I did it because I believe that David had a right to know, and because I am not able to know something true and not say it, and because I have watched, across every story of this kind that I have ever heard, the specific damage that is done by the people who knew and didn't say, who protected the lie because the truth was inconvenient, who decided their own comfort was more important than someone else's right to their own life. I did not want to be one of those people. I am not one of those people. That is not nothing. In the middle of everything I have lost, that is genuinely not nothing. I spent a Saturday 2 months ago going through old photographs. Not deliberately, I was clearing a shelf, and the photographs were in a box on the shelf, and once you've opened the box the pictures come out. There was one I sat with for a long time, Natalie and me at a family Christmas, maybe 15 years ago, both of us young and unguarded in the way people are young and unguarded before everything gets complicated. She's laughing at something. I'm looking at her the way I always looked at her, with the specific, uncomplicated love of someone who has never had to consider whether the love is returned. I put it back in the box. I didn't throw it away. I am not sure what that means, except that some things need to be kept even when you don't know yet what to do with them. If you have ever been in the position of knowing something true that someone else needs to know, something that will hurt them but that they have a right to, something that will cost you the telling of it, I want you to hear this from someone who made the choice. It costs what it costs. And it was still the right thing. The truth doesn't fix everything. It doesn't restore what's been taken. It doesn't rewind 17 months or give you back the Sunday phone calls or make the person who betrayed you into someone who didn't. But it gives the people around you the chance to live in reality instead of in the lies someone built for them. And that chance is not yours to withhold. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between silence and a truth that was going to cost you something real? What made you decide? I read everything, and I mean that more in this case than I usually do. Thank you for sitting with this one. It was hard to tell. I needed to tell it. Subscribe if you're here. There's always another one.